That was the church I'd been converted in, went to college and seminary. 7 years passed, I came back to pastor that church. And I said, well, we're just having our struggles. We don't have the money to do what God's laid in our hearts to do. And I remember Dr. Rogers prayed. And he said, Lord, bless this young man, and I pray you'd send him some people that could help underwrite his dream. Lord, send him some doctors. I don't know what it means. If you're a doctor, you better be giving. But anyway, he and just said, send some professional people. And you just don't understand unless you've never been in kind of a mill village type church. And so sure enough, I'll remember when God began to just send a lot of people that embraced our dream that did not live in our community. And as a result, that became the fastest growing Southern Baptist church in the state of North Carolina, even though it had not been a new home built in 42 years. Occasionally someone says anybody could build a church in Atlanta. Well, I'm glad God let me be part of building a church in an area where a new home had not been built in 42 solid years. Bottom line, lost people are everywhere, and people can be saved where you share the gospel anywhere. And God bless that ministry. So Dr. Rogers prayed with me. Long story short, fast forward through the years, I attempted to model my life and ministry after Dr. Rogers. Not his preaching ministry. I mean, he was a golden-tongued preacher, to say the least. He had a wit about him. I have on my counter at home where I do my devotions, a book that was written after he passed away entitled Adrianisms. And they're just these sayings that he had. He had a way of being a wordsmith, putting words together. Kind of, I've said that, but I've never said it quite like that. God used him in my life, to say the least. And so I would watch him. I'd go to convention. I'd see him. I watched how he handled people, how he was gentle with people, how he always had time with people, and just heard the stories. And bottom line, he meant a lot to me. He was extremely close to my heart in the sense of emulating the ministry of this man of God. And don't you dare say that's wrong to me. Don't you dare say that when there's not a singer alive that doesn't have their favorite singer. There's not a sports person alive that doesn't think, man, I like the way he plays. And often, and by the way, I don't have his picture in my house, you understand? Never put it on the wall like our people do with Michael Jordan and others, but I ought to, because he knows Jesus and others don't. But anyway, he meant a great deal to me. And so in recent days, you know, I was invited to do the closing part of the celebration of Dr. Rogers' retirement party in March of last year. That was a highlight for Janet and I, just to have a small part, and it was a small part. And to have dinner with the Rogers that night, spend that week with them, and who would have dreamed that 8 months later he would be in the presence of Christ. I know that God's timing is perfect, but sometimes it sure doesn't feel that way when your heart's hurting. On November the 2nd, 2005, Dr. Adrian Rogers was asked by a worldwide ministry if they could come to where he was and videotape a talk by him, a message by him. And he entitled his message, the top three truths for the next generation. The next day, Adrian Rogers would enter the hospital. They would find some pneumonia, some other complications, and as I mentioned in closing this morning, they placed him on a life support unit, a ventilator, only believing that it was going to be temporary and then he would come off. In fact, his pastor called me. Steve Gaines is a very wonderful friend of mine. And Dr. Gaines called and said that he visited Adrian Rogers in his room and said, they told him they were going to put the ventilator on, and said, well, before the ventilator, I want to have a worship service. And his entire family was there, a missionary in Spain, kids that live here in the United States. And they said he sort of did his goodbyes just in case. And they sang together, and he gave words of personal challenge and greeting to each of them.